Well, first, thank you all for joining us this evening. It's going to be great to share some music with you. I'm going to talk first, and then we'll go to the music. And I want to start basically by just talking about composition and what motivates me and what I think about when composing. And so I'm going to go back to my undergrad days for a moment. And that's when I first started composing, and when I was thinking about how to approach pieces, really I was looking for a lot of guidance at that time. I was looking for absolutes. I was looking for how do I write something that will be lasting and permanent and inspirational, and and I was looking for this guidance. And I think my first composition teacher, Thomas Jansen, I think he was reluctant to give me guidance. He was waiting for me to start to create and then give me some feedback. But he gave me parameters and approaches to begin with. I was born into this time of a lot of freedom in composition. It was kind of like, well, write what you want to write. But I was looking for the ways to do something that would make an impact. And part of that for me was because growing up, I think music was something that was so powerful and so comforting, and in a lot of cases, for somebody who was socially awkward like myself, really music a lot of times was my best friend. And I would listen to music of John Coltrane or different people, and found really a home there, I think, in the music. And then when studying music, it was really a little disarming to find that essentially music has no meaning. I said that. Music has no meaning inherently, okay? The meaning for music really is tied to culture. We get meaning through culture. We get meaning through shared experience, through sharing music together. In a way, this was a little bit confounding to me because I'm looking for absolutes, and what we have really is something that's constantly shifting. Culture is constantly changing. The answers are constantly changing. So in a way, while this was challenging for me, it also gave me some ideas for approach, because we always have this cultural framework that we're working against, trying to answer to. One writer that I think influenced me specifically was Edward Cohn, a theorist, and he talked a lot about the creation of music, and he liked the analogy of this idea of a frame. And if you think of visual arts, well, often there's a frame around the visual art. And he felt that music and literature had that same type of frame as well. The framework, though, is time. And he used the example that he was only aware of two pieces of literature that started at the beginning of the story: the book of Genesis and the Gospel of John. All of the others have to set the stage. What you're basically working from is a cultural framework that you exist within, but then set the stage with musical ideas within the framework of the piece. So what I'm trying to do really in this piece is to work with musical meaning. And the piece is divided into 8 sections. I don't really like to call them movements because they don't stand alone. You can't change the order or it screws things up, okay? That they're meant to be in the particular order that they're in. And so, I kind of dug a hole for myself here because I wrote a 22-minute piece where everything has to be included and it has to be played in the same order. So, it always has to be played in its entirety. Well, I think there are a few pieces within it that can stand alone, but for the most part, what I'm trying to do is have these musical ideas, okay, or these remnants, for those that were wanting to get into the title a little bit here. These remnants of ideas that kind of run through the entire piece. And what I try to do is establish their musical syntax early on, and then utilize those ideas then in different sections of the piece throughout the work. Let me see how much I've deviated here from my ideas. So there are these ideas that run through, okay, the entire piece, and what I'm trying to do is use them in the same types of situations. If something is coming to rest, I may use an idea from a previous section that was coming to rest, recalling that time that it was used. Now, starting out to write a piece of 20 minutes was a little bit daunting to me. The commission was for 20 minutes. They only asked for two things, about 20 minutes of music, then they said about. And then, but wanting to make sure that I met the request, I wrote about 22, I think. So, and they also asked that maybe if it would be nice if it did involve piano too. So, I decided to write this piece for saxophone and piano, and but it was the idea of writing a 20-minute work was a bit daunting. I've written long pieces before, but usually what happens is as I'm working on it, it gets longer and longer, and before I know it, then it can be that long. The idea of setting out to do something that was 20 minutes in length was a little daunting. So what I did at first is wrote some music for saxophone, wrote some music for piano, and in a way just played some games. And one of the first things that I was playing off of in writing for piano was the idea of mirroring the hands. Okay, that having the hands move in the same direction, okay, but basically opposite directions, because if they're mirroring, then some, while one hand is going up, the other hand will be going down musically. So I'm working with musical inversions here. And so that first section, Mirror, Mirror, that starts to play with this idea of the hands moving in opposite directions. And it's one of the ones that I initially just wrote for piano. And then once I was done, I just added some saxophone into it. But this idea of the mirroring came back in some other movements, in other sections of the piece as well. If you look at the title of the fifth section, Dab, well, one of the things that I realized as I was working with this mirroring is that you can really only have mirroring truly on two places on the keyboard, okay? D and A flat, all right? And if you're familiar with the keyboard, it's basically the D would be between the two keys, the A flat would be between with the three black keys that are together, it's the middle one. So that's the only place visually where you can truly mirror and have the hands be on the same types of keys when they're mirroring. So I was working off of those ideas in this particular section, okay? And one of the things that I began to realize as I was working with this is that, okay, if you take D and A flat, put them together, you got this word dab, right? And if you capitalize it, the A, then you have this line of symmetry right down the middle with the word. It really didn't have anything to do with this type of thing. But I had to put that in there because my kids will like to see that later. But anyway, so there's musical mirroring, and I go beyond just the piano doing this, but having the saxophone play lines and interplay. One of the interesting things that I found when I worked with this idea is that, in a sense, the harmonic intervals that are available when you're mirroring are basically the same as those that are available within the whole tone scale. Because I'm limiting myself to the mirroring, I'm only allowing myself then to have about half of the intervals. So that prompted me to break out of that structure. And as a jazz-influenced saxophonist, what better way to do that than to add a blue note? So there's a blue note that runs throughout there. Then another movement that's also influenced by this mirroring idea is the third, the complementary lacunae. Now, if you look at the third figure, if you read music and you look at the third figure, okay, there's a musical idea here that actually never occurs in the piece. All right, but it's the construct for which I wrote a lot of this third section. Initially, the piano plays that upper part, okay, the part that would be for the right hand, but then the musical notes that are available to the piano in the left hand would only be those that would form the complement, okay, or basically the inversion of that initial idea. So I limited myself playing with this idea of only allowing the notes that are part of the inversion, okay, and the others then would be silent, okay. If you look at if you know some pitch class set theory, if you look at the fourth one, threw this in for some of my students here. If you look at the pitch numbers, the idea on the top is almost the exact complement to the idea on the bottom. There's one difference in that the D is duplicated and the A flat is absent. Otherwise, they form a perfect complement to each other. Then through this piece then, when the saxophone enters, it's going to enter with one of those notes from the inversion as well. And then there's a point later where the piano is working off of the left hand, okay, the left hand idea that's there in the example, and so the notes that are available within the saxophone are going to be the ones that would correspond to the right hand of the piano. Then, even when the piano goes silent, what I do is only allow the notes that would be the corresponding notes to what would have been sounding within the piano part. So there's some space in there. To turn to some of the other sections, the second section initially was I wrote as a solo saxophone piece. And then we had a colleague who was retiring last year, and so I decided I got to put some marimba with this. So I added some marimba, and then Dr. Schaefer and I played that together. But then I used basically the exact same saxophone part, but threw out the marimba part and rewrote new music then for the piano against it. Now, it might seem like cheating if you think, okay, well, he's just getting more mileage out of this. But it's actually, in some ways, a little more difficult to limit myself to what was there in the saxophone part and not allow myself to make changes to it because it existed in another piece. Let's see, the fourth movement here is one of the relic ideas, because a composer that influences me both in thought about composition and in construction of the music is Luciano Berio. And so what I've taken here is I've grabbed a musical idea from Frédéric Chopin, not the same one as the Luciano and Frédéric, but this is Frédéric and Luciano. So I grabbed an idea from an A minor mazurka, and that's really embedded within this piece. Now, it doesn't sound like Chopin, though. If you're thinking, how dare he ruin Chopin? I didn't harm Chopin at all, okay? It still exists, it's still there. This is out of admiration for Chopin's music that I've taken this idea and kind of infused it within my own. And you won't know it, you won't recognize it, but it's there. Let's see, the sixth section, 19, well, I started writing that on the 19th anniversary of my first date with my wife, and so I thought that 19 would be a very good title for this one. Let's see, the seventh section, 433, is really in homage to John Cage. I think John Cage is a much maligned composer within the 20th century. And 4 minutes and 33 seconds is a piece of his that a lot of people know, and then that's all they know about John Cage, and then they berate him for writing 4 minutes and 33 seconds without knowing the body of his work. Well, really, John Cage was highly influential for a lot of the music that exists now. Things like Bang on the Can, Stomp, even Flash Mobs really are related to the types of things that John Cage and the other composers within his group were going after. And so this is really in homage to John Cage, and I forced myself into another approach here. I threw some dice and let the dice determine the piano part. And it determined pitch, it determined range, it determined dynamics, articulation, and at first, I didn't like my results, so I threw them out and I had to set new parameters. I set parameters that I felt would maybe yield better results the second time around, and they did. So that's what you're going to hear tonight. That's paired against essentially a theme from the second section of this work. I've just inverted that. So that's what you'll hear in the saxophone part. And then to drive home the point of cultural meaning, I just have to ask, if I say duck, duck, you say, there we go. So, duck, duck, goose has cultural meaning, okay? And so the musical ideas that I utilized in here, basically I drew from all of the previous sections and put them together in this last section of the piece. And at first I just wrote this sonata exposition, and I was like, okay, I like it, but it's not going to work that way. So what I did is I created gaps, and then those gaps then is where I went to some quotes of the previous sections. So in a way, it's kind of a musical game of duck, duck, goose. Although at one point in there's also a little bit of fugue type music, because I took an initial theme, and then I flipped it over and put it backwards, and then I paired it with the piano playing the same theme, so we're playing it in stretto. So the subtitle there, Sonatus Contrapunctus, I forget my third word. What's my third word? Interruptus, because I keep breaking the flow of the direction. That's inspired a bit by the idea of cartoons. Let me find my visual here. These guys are very inspirational, I think, to me as a composer right here. And if you've seen any of the Roadrunner and Coyote cartoons before, you'll see some fake Latin written in there. Well, I used some actual Latin and some fake Latin there. Then in this alternate title, cartoon music really came about at a time when there was a lot of neoclassical music that was still in the air culturally, and so I grew up hearing these ideas that were combining and coming together, and in some ways fun. And so really, duck, duck is supposed to be fun, okay? And some other things are supposed to be fun too. In closing, I just want to say that I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to present to you. I appreciate that opportunity from NMTA to write this work, and I'm very happy to play this piece with my dear friend, Dr. Jim Margetts. He's also my boss, but he was my friend first. So, when I was first interviewing at Chadron, let's see, my dissertation wasn't done. I didn't have many job prospects. My wife was pregnant with our second child. I should have been a wreck during the interview process, but I was very calm. And one of the first things was rehearsing with Jim, and I've just felt very comfortable with him, since those first contacts, and I think that probably had some influence on how things went here for me. So I'm very happy to have this opportunity to share this music with him. And so I'm going to wet a reed, and then we'll present Relics and Remnants. relic, maybe it's not old enough to be a relic, but one of the relics was the Chopin piece that I had embedded in there. Some of my previous works. And then really with that second section, I was really going after like, this timeless soliloquy, even though I knew that timelessness is a hollow pursuit now. But that would be the relics. The remnants were the pieces that ran basically throughout the entire piece. That there's these musical ideas that are present, and then in that last section, everybody's present. So,
one of my Facebook friends asked whether I was a remnant or a relic.
well, those concerns since we both turned 50 this year.
He's older than I am.
19.
Any other questions?
Okay, so you say that 22 minutes is like a daunting length, but I look at that and be like, there are rhythms and notes and articulations and dynamics and everything else that goes into writing a piece that would be incredibly daunting. So how on earth, even with all of the stuff that you've already kind of set up, and mirroring and a lot of the pitch material, how do you even begin? In 2 minutes or less.
Well, it really started with playing with some ideas, and so I thought, okay, I'll write some saxophone music, and so that second section, I was writing it, and I thought I want it to work a la vario, like a sequenza, and then I'll add other music to it. So I wrote that. I do believe it stands on its own, but then I added other music to it. Then I started writing just piano parts by itself, kind of playing with ideas. I decided to play, and so that's where it started. And then once it started, then it just kind of exploded. Because I thought, like maybe 5 or 6 sections, but then it got longer. I don't punch the clock because that's kind of it's kind of demoralizing because it took a really long time. I was very happy that I had a sabbatical, and I was writing it during my sabbatical, and so I would drop off the kids, have some more coffee, and then I was writing. And I forgot to mention this. One of the gratifying things to me is I was concerned that because I wanted aspects to be catchy, and so I was very happy when both of my daughters walked around the house singing Duck Duck. Just have it in their heads. Yeah. What? Well, thank you all. I really appreciate you all coming. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope I didn't scare you too much. And thanks again. Thanks to Margetts, thank you, Shawn, Hartman, and thank you, Daniel, for your work behind the scenes. Sometimes I forget, but I always appreciate everything you do for us. So thank you.